On a warm morning in early June, Maya Jensen stood at the edge of a 40-acre field in Vernon County, Wisconsin, and watched 300 laying hens scratch through grass that came almost up to their backs. Behind the birds were 6 low, white mobile coops mounted on old wagon frames. Ahead of them were long rows of young hazelnut bushes running across the slope instead of straight up and down it. From the county road, the whole thing looked unfinished. The hazelnut bushes were still small. The grass between the rows was uneven. Some patches were thick with clover. Others were full of broadleaf plants that most farmers in the area would have sprayed before breakfast. People slowed down when they drove past. A few stopped. One man leaned out of his truck window and asked Maya if she was raising chickens or growing brush. Another told her that if she left the grass that tall, she would have nothing but weeds by August. The least polite people said the Jensen family had taken perfectly good corn ground and turned it into a chicken park. Maya heard all of it. She also wrote down the date, the soil temperature, the height of the ground cover, and the number of eggs collected that morning. To understand why that field looked so strange, you have to understand what a normal field looked like in that part of Wisconsin. Most of the rolling ground around the Jensen farm was planted in corn, soybeans, or hay. The fields were clean, straight, and easy to understand from the road. You planted in spring. You sprayed weeds. You applied fertilizer. You harvested in fall. If you had livestock, you usually kept them on pasture somewhere else, or inside a building, where feeding and manure could be managed separately. The system was familiar. Every part had its place. Crops grew in crop fields. Chickens lived in chicken houses. Trees belonged in woods, windbreaks, or front yards. You did not usually mix all three on the same piece of ground and expect people to call it farming. The Jensen family had owned their farm since 1978, when Maya's grandfather bought the original 80 acres. Over the years, the family added neighboring parcels until they were farming just under 300 acres. Maya's father, Tom, raised corn and soybeans and kept a small beef herd. He was careful, practical, and not interested in being known as an innovator. He wanted the farm to pay its bills. That was enough. Maya was 26 years old when she came back home after studying natural resource management and agricultural business. She did not return with a speech about saving the planet. She came back with a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet showed that one of the Jensen fields, a 40-acre slope on the south side of the farm, had been losing money in quiet ways for years. The corn yields were decent at the top of the hill and weak at the bottom. Heavy rain carried soil downhill. Fertilizer costs kept rising. The field needed more input every year just to produce roughly what it had produced before. Maya had pulled soil samples at 3 depths. The topsoil was thinner in the middle of the slope than it was near the fence line. Organic matter was low. Water moved across the surface faster than it soaked in. The field was still productive, but it was becoming more expensive to keep it productive. Maya proposed something her father had never tried. She wanted to plant hybrid hazelnuts in rows that followed the contour of the hill. Between those rows, she would establish perennial grasses, clover, and other low-growing plants. Then she would move laying hens through the alleys in small sections, using portable fencing and mobile coops. The hazelnuts would eventually produce a crop that could be sold. The chickens would produce eggs from the first year. The grass would protect the soil. The roots of the hazelnuts and perennial plants would hold the slope, feed soil life, and help water soak into the ground. The chickens would eat insects, seeds, and some of the vegetation. Their manure would return nutrients to the soil, but the birds would never stay in one place for long. That part mattered. Maya was not proposing that chickens automatically improved land. Chickens left in one area too long could destroy ground faster than almost any animal on the farm. They scratched. They concentrated manure. They turned wet soil into mud. Her entire model depended on movement. The chickens would stay in one section for only a few days. Then Maya would move the fencing and pull the coops forward. The section behind them would rest for weeks. The birds would disturb the surface, add fertility, and move on before the damage became permanent. The plants would recover. The soil would remain covered. The hazelnuts would grow above the system and eventually add another source of income. Trees, grass, chickens, rest, and time. That was the model. Tom Jensen listened to his daughter explain it at the kitchen table in January. He looked at the maps. He looked at the projected costs for plants, fencing, water lines, and mobile coops. Then he looked at the section showing that the hazelnuts might take several years to produce meaningful income. So we spend money now, he said, and wait for bushes to pay us back later. The chickens pay us now, Maya said. The hazelnuts pay us later, and the soil improves in between. Tom leaned back in his chair. What happens when the chickens kill the bushes? We protect the trunks while they're young. What happens when foxes find the chickens? We use electric netting and lock the birds in at night. What happens when the egg price drops? Then we still have the trees, the ground cover, and lower fertilizer costs. Tom looked at the spreadsheet again. You have an answer for everything. No, Maya said. I have a plan for measuring what goes wrong. That answer was probably what convinced him. He gave her 20 acres. Not 40. 20. If it works, he said, we'll talk about the rest. The person who made sure the rest of the county heard about Maya's plan was Dale Mercer. Dale was 62 and had worked as a crop advisor and seed salesman for more than 30 years. He was not foolish, and he was not cruel. He knew the soils in Vernon County. He knew which hybrids handled wet springs and which fields always dried out first in July. He had helped farmers through floods, droughts, low prices, and bad planting seasons. When Dale gave advice, people listened because his advice had often been useful. But Dale also believed that good farming should look controlled, straight rows, clean fields, clear boundaries between crops and livestock. When he saw the hazelnut rows, tall grass, portable fences, and white chicken coops on the Jensen slope, he saw disorder. He brought it up one morning at the local feed store. Tom Jensen's daughter has chickens running through a brush planting on the South Hill, he said. A farmer at the counter asked what the bushes were. Hazelnuts, Dale said. Apparently the chickens fertilize them, and the bushes save the soil, and somehow everybody gets rich. The men at the counter laughed. Maya happened to be near the back of the store buying poultry minerals. She heard the laughter before she heard her name. When she walked to the register, the conversation stopped. Dale turned toward her. Maya, he said, I hope you know chickens can strip a field bare. I do. And poultry manure can burn plants if it gets concentrated. I know. And predators are going to find those coops. I'm planning for that. Dale nodded toward the road. What I don't understand is why you need the hazelnuts. If you want to raise chickens, raise chickens. If you want to grow a crop, because the pieces help each other, Maya said. Dale smiled a little. It was not an angry smile. It was the smile of a man who believed he had seen this kind of enthusiasm before. The pieces also create more ways for something to go wrong. That's true, Maya said, but they create more ways to make money too. You're waiting years for those bushes to produce. The eggs create cash flow while we wait. You're adding labor. We're reducing mowing, spraying, and some fertilizer. You're going to lose birds. Probably some. Dale raised his eyebrows. And that still looks like a good plan to you? It looks like a system worth testing. Dale picked up his coffee. I've been working with crop ground in this county since before you were born. I know. And that hill grows good corn. It grows expensive corn, Maya said. The room got quiet. She did not say it sharply. She said it like someone reading a number from a page. Dale looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded. Well, he said, we'll see what it looks like after a real storm. That storm came in the 3rd year. By then, the hazelnut bushes were chest-high in some sections. Their roots had spread through the slope, and the grass alleys were thick enough that Maya had started worrying less about bare soil and more about managing too much growth. The chickens moved through the alleys from May through October. Maya divided the field into temporary sections. Every few days, she moved the birds forward. Behind them, the grass looked rough and disturbed. There were scratched patches around the coops and waterers, but most of the ground remained covered. Within 2 weeks, the clover and grass began filling back in. That summer started dry. Then, in late June, a storm stalled over the county and dropped more than 4 inches of rain in a few hours. Water ran across roads, culverts filled. Several cornfields on sloping ground developed visible channels where soil washed downhill. On one neighboring field, brown water collected at the bottom of the slope and poured through a broken section of fence. Tom Jensen drove out during a break in the rain to check Maya's field. He expected mud. He expected the chicken area to be a mess. Instead, he found water moving slowly through the grass between the hazelnut rows. The rows followed the contour of the hill, so they interrupted the downhill flow. Stems, roots, fallen leaves, and thick ground cover slowed the water long enough for more of it to soak in. There was runoff. Maya never claimed there was none, but the water leaving her field was clearer than the water leaving the neighboring corn ground. The mobile coops sat on slightly raised areas. The birds were dry inside. The section they had left 4 days earlier was flattened in spots, but it had not washed away. Tom stood in the rain with his hands on his hips. Maya came up beside him wearing a yellow rain jacket. "You planned this?" he asked. "I planned for it," she said. "I didn't know it would happen this year." He looked across the slope. For the first time, the rows did not look random to him. They looked like they were doing a job. The rain stopped. Then the heat came. July temperatures stayed high for nearly 3 weeks. The nights remained warm, and the open fields dried quickly. Farmers running chickens on bare lots or short pasture had trouble keeping birds cool. Egg production dropped in several flocks. Water use climbed. Some birds crowded against the shaded sides of coops. In Maya's field, the hazelnuts were not large enough to create full shade everywhere, but they created broken strips of shade that moved across the alleys during the day. The chickens followed it. At noon, they rested beneath the widest bushes. In the evening, they moved back into the grass and started feeding again. The soil under the ground cover stayed cooler than exposed soil. The grass slowed down, but it did not disappear. Maya adjusted the rotation. She reduced the number of days the chickens spent in each section and increased the rest period behind them. The birds still needed grain. The field did not magically replace a balanced ration. But the chickens also ate insects, seeds, tender plants, and fallen material from the system. More importantly, the field gave them an environment that reduced heat stress and kept them active. By the end of July, Maya's hens were laying more consistently than several nearby outdoor flocks. That was when Dale Mercer drove past the Jensen place. He slowed down near the south field. The chickens were spread beneath the hazelnut rows instead of crowding inside the coops. The grass behind the last rotation was already growing back. Dale did not stop. But Maya saw his truck. Seeing something work was not enough for Maya. She wanted numbers. She recorded egg production every day. She tracked feed use, bird losses, labor hours, fuel, fencing repairs, and veterinary costs. She measured how long each section rested before the chickens returned. She photographed the soil surface from the same marked locations every month. She took soil samples every fall. She measured water infiltration with metal rings pressed into the ground. She compared the hazelnut field with the remaining corn section on the same slope. By the end of the 3rd year, the system had not made the family rich. That mattered, because Maya refused to tell people a success story that was cleaner than the real one. The mobile coops required repairs. Moving fences took time. A raccoon found a weak latch during the first summer and killed 11 birds. Some hazelnut bushes died and had to be replaced. Egg sales were strong in summer and less predictable in winter. But the field was producing income while the hazelnuts matured. The family sold eggs directly to customers in town and through 2 local stores. Their commercial hazelnut harvest was still small, but it was large enough to sell to a regional processor. Fertilizer purchases for the field fell. Herbicide use dropped to almost nothing. The family no longer paid to mow the alleys because the chickens and planned cutting managed most of the growth. The soil tests showed a gradual increase in organic matter near the surface. Water soaked into the ground faster than it had during the first year. The most important number was not one dramatic profit figure. It was the number of ways the same acre now contributed. The hazelnuts created one crop. The chickens created another. The ground cover protected the soil. The chicken manure returned nutrients. The rows slowed water. The shade reduced heat stress. Each part was useful on its own, but the value came from the way the parts worked together. Trees produced nuts and roots. Grass covered and fed the ground. Chickens produced eggs and fertility. Movement prevented the chickens from destroying what they were supposed to improve. Rest allowed the plants to recover. Then the cycle started again. That was the model, and Maya repeated it every time someone came to visit. One of the first people to take her seriously was a farmer named Rachel Boone, who owned 30 acres outside Viroqua. Rachel had a small egg business and a field too steep for comfortable row crop farming. She visited the Jensen farm 3 times before asking Maya for help. Together, they laid out 10 acres of hazelnut rows and designed a rotation for 200 hens. Dale heard about it. By then, the system was no longer one young woman's experiment. It was beginning to spread. Still, one successful storm and one hot summer could be called luck. The real test came 2 years later. That summer brought a deeper drought than the county had seen in years. Rain disappeared in June. July stayed hot. Pastures turned brown. Corn leaves rolled tightly by midday. Feed prices climbed. Farmers with outdoor poultry systems watched their grass vanish and began moving birds over bare ground. On the Jensen farm, the hazelnut field looked stressed. It did not look perfect. Some leaves curled, nut size was smaller. The grass grew slowly, but the ground remained covered. The older hazelnut roots reached moisture below the dry surface. The shade reduced evaporation. The rested sections still had enough living plant material to recover after the chickens moved through. Maya lowered the stocking density and kept the birds moving. The family bought more feed than they had planned, but they did not lose the field. They still sold eggs. They still harvested hazelnuts. They still had a living cover protecting the hill when the first heavy fall rain arrived. The neighboring cornfield produced a crop that year, but the yield was poor and the input costs had already been spent. When Maya completed the annual numbers, she placed 2 pages in front of her father at the kitchen table. One showed revenue from eggs and hazelnuts, along with feed, labor, equipment, and replacement costs. The other showed the soil data from the first year through the drought. Tom read both pages. Then he asked one question. "How many acres would you plant next?" Maya looked at him. "The other 20 on the slope." Tom nodded. "And after that?" "I'd wait, measure it, fix what we got wrong." He tapped the paper. "This isn't a side project anymore, is it?" "No," Maya said. Tom leaned back. "I thought you were putting chickens in an orchard." "I know. What you built is more like a machine." Maya smiled. "A slow machine." The following winter, Maya was invited to speak at the county soil and water conservation meeting. About 80 farmers attended. Dale Mercer sat in the 3rd row. Maya showed photographs from the storm year. She showed the runoff comparison, the ground cover records, the egg totals, the feed costs, the bird losses, and the hazelnut harvest. She also showed the failures, the dead bushes, the predator loss, the muddy area around a water tank that had remained in one place too long. She told the room that chickens could damage soil. She told them that trees could compete with understory plants. She told them the model required labor, planning, and constant adjustment. Then she explained the cycle one more time. The hazelnuts provided a long-term crop, deep roots, and shade. The ground cover protected soil and supported the birds. The chickens created immediate income and returned nutrients. Movement prevented overuse. Rest allowed recovery. Better soil helped the trees and grass survive difficult weather. And surviving difficult weather protected the farm's income. When Maya finished, the questions were different from the ones she had heard at the feed store years earlier. Nobody asked why she had put chickens in a field of bushes. They asked how many days the birds stayed in one section. They asked how she protected young plants. They asked how much labor it took to move the coops. They asked how many years passed before the first marketable hazelnut crop. They asked whether the system could work with broilers instead of laying hens. Dale waited until most people had left. Maya was gathering papers when he walked to the front of the room. "You kept the ugly pictures," he said. "The failures?" He nodded. "Most people leave those out. They're part of the cost." Dale looked at the empty screen. "I thought you were trying to make chickens do the work of fertilizer." "They do some of it, but that wasn't really the point." "No. The point was the whole system." Maya zipped her laptop bag. "That was the point." Dale put on his coat. "I told people that field would be bare dirt in 3 years. I heard. I was wrong." Maya looked at him. "You were right about one thing." "What's that?" "Chickens can destroy a field." Dale laughed. "So can farmers." "That too." In the spring, Dale began asking different questions when he visited farms. He asked how long animals stayed in one place. He asked how much ground remained covered after they moved. He asked what the field was producing besides the most obvious crop. He did not become a different man overnight. He simply stopped assuming that a clean field was always a healthy field. Years later, a 21-year-old intern named Eli came to Maya with a hand-drawn map. By then, the hazelnut rows were tall enough to shade most of the chickens during the hottest part of the day. The farm sold eggs, roasted hazelnuts, and young planting stock. Eli wanted to add native fruit shrubs along the outer rows and place beehives near the flowering strips. He talked quickly. He explained pollination, fruit sales, and habitat. Maya listened. For a moment, she remembered standing at her father's kitchen table with her own map and spreadsheet. She remembered how certain she had sounded. She remembered how much she had not known. When Eli finished, Maya looked at the map. "Have you measured what's already growing in those outer rows?" "Not yet." "Do you know when the hazelnuts need the most water?" "I have a general idea." "Do you know whether the bees would interfere with how we move the coops?" "I was going to figure that out." Maya handed the map back to him. Eli's face fell. Then she walked to the shelf, picked up a soil probe and a notebook, and placed them on top of the map. "Start with the baseline," she said. "Then we'll test 5 rows." Eli looked up. "You think it could work?" "I think it's worth measuring." Outside the kitchen window, chickens moved through the shade beneath the hazelnuts. They scratched the soil, ate what they could find, and left fertility behind. A few days later, the coops would move. The grass would rest. The roots would keep growing. The nuts would fill. The soil beneath all of it would continue changing slowly, season after season, whether anyone driving past understood what they were seeing or not. Maya had not proved that chickens saved soil. She had proved something more useful. No animal improves land simply by being placed on it. No crop creates resilience simply because it has deep roots. No field becomes profitable just because it produces more than one thing. The improvement comes from the relationships. Trees, plants, animals, movement, rest, water, time, and a farmer willing to measure what is actually happening. From the road, the field still looked a little wild, but it was producing eggs. It was producing hazelnuts. It was holding soil. And when the difficult years came, it was still working.